Hey, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to a special episode of the Giant Zone tonight. This is episode 37. This is a special one for you tonight. Before we get into that, you've got our co-host, Steve, the banker, of course.
What's going on?
And you got yours truly, Fly Guy Carl. And tonight we are joined by Ken McKusick of the Baltimore Ravens. He writes specifically about the Baltimore Ravens, and I'll let him get into that for a minute. Ken, welcome to the show. Thank you for some time tonight. We really appreciate it.
Happy to do it, guys.
Thank you so much. Ken, I know you saw on Twitter, some of our followers are familiar with you and have listened to you already. But for those that aren't, can you give us a little background about yourself, how you get into the Ravens, writing for them or about them, and so on and so forth, please?
So how far back do you want me to go? I'll be as quick as possible and give you my life back to college here. I went to school to be a baseball broadcaster. Went to Syracuse, got my broadcasting degree. It wasn't good enough to be a baseball broadcaster. I kind of knew that before I left. Continued on, became an actuary. That's where I spent the most of my professional career. Since 2006, I've been writing about the Ravens for various places, mostly my own website, also another one here in Baltimore, but also folded up my career, retired early at age 52, 8 years ago, and decided I wanted to write about football full time. So that's what I've been doing, and really enjoying it. Just been a good life so far. And I've done, when I first got into it in 2006, I really wanted to do something that wasn't being done. So very little was written on the defense. And so I took that up and I did offensive line scoring, which is the other big thing that I'm still doing today. And I really enjoy both of those and try to find that other part of the conversation. Everybody wants to talk wide receiver, running backs, but I'm a little bit different.
So quick question here. Explain to me about offensive line scoring. How does that work?
Mm-hmm. So I have a system. PFF, for instance, has a system. I've known those guys since the beginning, so we're back and forth all the time about how whether or not certain things make sense. I have them on my show all the time. By the way, if you haven't gotten these guys, try getting some of the PFF interns on your show. They're just outstanding. They're so smart. The top guys will talk to you too, but the interns I found to be exceptional in terms of they're always working on some kind of specific new study, and it's interesting as hell and engaging, and they love to come on and vet their models. So it's something I really appreciate in having them. But in terms of offensive line scoring, that's what you asked me. Each block is looked at, and there's a scoring system for crediting a block or not. It's a fairly simple system from the standpoint you get 1 point at the maximum on a block. You can lose 2 for allowing a penetration or allowing a pressure, 3 for allowing a quarterback hit, 6 for allowing a sack. All those events are split among all responsible. So the negative numbers are done. So I probably go into more detail than you need to know, but it uses a 3-second standard and a throwing cone that needs to be not invaded by the pass rusher. So if you're avoiding giving up a pressure, you want to avoid getting the quarterback's cone invaded, so he has the ability to step into that throw.
I did not realize it got drilled down to such fine detail. So that's interesting to know. That's great. Steve, what do you have?
Well, before we get into football itself, I just have a general football question. Ken, are you a fan there because you're in the greater Baltimore area? And there's a reason I'm asking that.
I am a fan in the greater Baltimore area. I just live north of the city by about a mile or two. Yeah.
So this isn't me with an I got you. We didn't have a chance to talk about this before the show started, but my best friend in the whole world, my buddy George, born and raised. So George, you're out there. I hope you're watching or listening to this. Props to you. Lifelong Baltimore resident, fan of everything, University of Maryland, all the teams, the Orioles. And I say all that to say lifelong Colts fan, the whole family. And then we all know what happened, right? And I remember when the Ravens came around, and so this is a segue back to you, it wasn't like an instantaneous fan of the Ravens. I mean, the people there was all. So did you find that difficult as well? Being a fan, I would assume maybe of the Colts, and then transition to when the Ravens came into town. What was that like for you?
You've correctly gauged my age. So I'm a Burt Jones era fan in the mid 70s.
There you go.
I'm 59. And I grew up with the Colts of that era. Caught the very tail end of the Unitas era. I listened to my first games on radio probably in 72. So it's the loss of the Colts was very traumatic to the Baltimore community, but the Colts had also kind of dug their way into a hole that they really wanted to leave the city. The Ursays were not investing in the team. They were pretty much treating the city like crap when they left. And Bob Irsay is a big thing. His grave is really closely guarded whenever the Colts play in Indianapolis. Apparently, a lot of Ravens fans and whatnot, Baltimore people, and there's fewer of us now who are still alive, and fewer of us who are likely to do this kind of thing at the advanced ages we are. But there's a big problem with urination on his grave.
Wow.
And whatnot. So
Wow.
his grave is guarded when the Ravens go to town there. But it's my wife is from Indianapolis. I've forgiven her for that. I really never was an issue. But she does offensive line scoring with me, and is an incredible supportive element to the process I have here.
That's
I think most people assume New Yorkers would have zero empathy, but the truth is when we and I'm a little bit younger, but not much. And so he and I can kid, but when I talk to older New Yorkers or people from here,
Dodgers and the Giants
on the baseball side, and I'm a lifelong Yankee fan, but when we talk to older New Yorkers about the Giants and Dodgers and when they left, the reality is that happened for those listening in the New York area long ago. So it's not like it hasn't happened before. It is rare, thankfully. I joke with him. I used to joke with him quite a bit, but after the year 2000, I couldn't really joke anymore. Unfortunately, that Super Bowl, but I was just curious. So yeah.
So there's a lot of people that just will not let that go.
Which, the Super Bowl or the Colts?
No, the Colts leaving.
Yeah. There are a lot of people who won't let it go. There's still a lot of people who I mean, I'll tell you what, the Browns hate the Ravens in the same way the Ravens fans hate the Colts. It's just probably a little less. But the Cleveland fans, they really were into their team. They really enjoyed them. They have a tremendously dedicated and into it fan base in terms of discussion at a high level of football X's and O's and whatnot. I respect them totally, but they still have an edge in terms of what's going on there. It's even though the Steelers and the Ravens have really been the rivalry over the last 20 years or so. It's the Browns will always have that edge towards the Ravens, always have that hatred, it seems.
And the Colts, if I'm correct, they left in the middle of the night, did they not?
Yeah,
they did. They left in a bunch of Mayflower vans. They hired a bunch of frat boys to move them out and whatnot. So it pretty well sucked. Yeah.
So anyway, thank you for that. That's actually pretty interesting. We could do a whole show on that, but let's kind of focus on Sunday's game. So I'm going to start with a generic question, and then Steve, you can start running, a little bit more in depth if you want. We can go that way. But what is the feeling down in your area and amongst Ravens fans about the Giants? How are they concerned about this game? Do they look at this game as a win? What's standing out about the Giants down there?
Definitely concerned about the Giants. I mean, they're a 4-1 team. Obviously, there are significant context issues with regard to who they've beaten, and we can go into that a little bit if you want to. But they also have some things that I think have been Achilles' heels for the Ravens in terms of being able to stop. The Ravens' two significant weaknesses this year have been stopping the run, which is very un-Ravens-like, but they've allowed 5.0 yards per carry. So, how to contain Saquon is going to be a big part of this game. And then the other thing they haven't done very well is deal with passes between level 2 and level 3 of the defense. And there, the Giants tight ends, the mesh concepts they run, could certainly give the Ravens, I think, a lot of trouble.
And now we saw Darius Slayton get introduced back into the offense on Sunday against the Packers, and he's into those levels now. So if he can effectively play a part there, that's going to be a very big plus, I'm assuming, for the Giants then.
I mean, he's the big receiving threat now, right? Everyone else is hurt.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's incredible. Slayton was a guy that I probably, they talked about Bradbury and they talked about Tony before the season in terms of being trade pieces that the Giants might have been willing to go. But Darius Slayton was the only one, I think, in terms of a contract standpoint that really might have made sense for the Ravens. They decided to play the cards they had, and they've done very well with them. So, we're pretty happy here. Ravens, if people probably don't know this now, are playing some of the most heavy alignments in NFL history, or certainly in recent decades. We talk about that more if you want.
Sure. Steve, what do you have?
It's I really started to dig in preparation for this and for this weekend, the Ravens. And I saw, we could talk about that fullback who I didn't realize made multiple Pro Bowls. Very interesting background, very interesting player, over 300 pounds. Obviously that offensive line. Why don't we start more high level? So I guess the question I'm going to ask, and I'll just give a couple statistics that I see. The question I'm going to ask is, how are the Ravens a little bit different this year on offense than in years past and what you're used to as a fan? Offensively, 14th in total yards is not bad, right? You're in the top half, and obviously injuries play a part, as you said. Number 7 in rushing. I think if I'm a Ravens fan, though, the thing that's disappointing is how much of that is Lamar as opposed to your running backs. Giants are number 2, but I didn't realize the Ravens were that high up in the rushing. And then number 4 in points scored, which is obviously what probably matters the most. Giants are number 20. You guys are number 4. So even though your record's 3-2, you're scoring points. That doesn't seem to be the issue. So talk to us about offense. I'm still scared of your offensive line. We can definitely get into that a little bit. But at a high level, how is the team maybe the same or different? What can we expect as Giants fans about your offense and the philosophy?
All right. Look, I think the goal for the Ravens this year, and the goal from my perspective anyway, was for the Ravens to return to an offense that's somewhere between 19 and 20 in terms of effectiveness. Those offenses were both very good, historically outstanding rushing teams. If you look at other stats like DVOA, you're going to see that the Ravens are winning a very high percentage of their plays, and particularly when you consider the opponents they've played, having already had Buffalo and Cincinnati, a good Miami team, frankly, a good Jets team already on the schedule so far. They've actually played some pretty tough teams. New England, the other team they played, is just pitched a shutout this last weekend. So their offenses really look very good, and they probably had their weakest game of the year against Cincinnati in this last one. They definitely got some pressure on Lamar. Lamar had a hard time throwing the football, but I think very positive on the offense. The problem has been on the defense. That's where they've really gotten let down. And at home, they've blown leads of 21, 17, and 10 in their 3 games, which is so un-Ravens like. I can't even tell you. The one thing you can always tell, if the Ravens get up 17 points, they're going to put their foot on the opponent's throat and put them away. In the Lewis and Reed era for certain anyway. And in this era, this year, they've blown these leads, and they've blown it the way you wouldn't expect. So the Ravens are really built back to front defensively. So they do have a good defensive line, but they have terrible inside linebackers. Right now, they have weak edge players because people are all hurt. A couple guys have returned to practice this week in Bowser and Ajabo, but they have Adafeowe and the ex-Giant Jason Pierre-Paul on each edge, and they're just having to play too many snaps right now. On the back end, they're playing the dime defense they want to play, but it's not having the same impact without much of a pass rush. So that's hurt them, and that's been a big part of why Miami and Buffalo were able to come back so easily.
So I definitely want us to get into defense. I know, Carl, you probably have some questions, but just sort of hitting the pause button. And Ken, if I could just drill down on offense. I saw today that Rashad Bateman didn't practice. The one thing, if I'm a Ravens fan or looking from the outside in, it's always like, but if they only had a number 1 receiver, they finally had a guy sort of, and then they traded him to the Cardinals to reunite with Kyler, and they picked Bateman in the draft. I loved him. I thought maybe the Giants might take him, 3rd round, 4th, we weren't sure what the Giants were going to do. And if he was available, which he wasn't. 11 catches, so he doesn't have a ton of productivity in the catches. 243 yards, he's 47th. He's got 2 touchdowns, so he's tied for 22, but he's 2nd in the NFL in yards per catch. And I've watched some highlights in some games. He's that guy that if Lamar gets a second, he's the guy that stretches your field. If he doesn't play, so 2-part question. A, what do you think? Do you think he's going to play if he didn't practice today? And then
no, I don't expect him to play.
All right. So then what's the impact offensively, do you think?
Yeah, it's significant. I mean, they went through it last week. Obviously, they got through against the Bengals without him. He's had a terrific season, by the way. If you're evaluating receivers, the number I always look at is yards per target. And he's over 11, which would be currently his number is, I think, 11.05. The Ravens' all-time record for a season is 11.04 by Mark Andrews in his rookie year. So he's doing everything he needs to do from a productivity standpoint, despite some drops, frankly, this year. So it's been some wet weather games in New England and at the Jets that both were problems. So anyway, still no issue there. He's been a really great slant presence for Lamar. His 75-yard touchdown was a 8-yard slant or something that he took 75 yards against the Dolphins. And you look at it, you say, wow, he's a lot faster than we thought he was.
Yeah.
So exciting player. The Ravens will have to try and get by with lesser receivers. Devin Duvernay picked up a huge amount of the offense this last week, both as a runner and as a receiver. So it'll be interesting to see if they try and use him almost like Cordell Patterson in terms of a multi-purpose guy this week again.
And that was actually going to be my question, piggybacking off of Steve. Two of them. What is the injury that Bateman has, and how long is he going to be out for?
They've been a little bit cryptic about it, but I think it's a foot injury. I don't believe it to be any kind of Liz Frank thing, or I think that we would have already been on IR. But I haven't. I have not heard for sure. Justice Hill has, if you're looking for other injuries, Justice Hill has a hamstring injury, and he just came back limited today. He's very important because he's a speed back. They need to threaten the outside. Ronnie Stanley, just a rest day. He'll be back on, I think, an increased pitch count this week. So we'll see.
Yeah, and you've got to be impressed with what you've gotten out of Hill so far. I mean, he's only got 19 attempts, but it looks like you're getting good production out of him. Maybe a bit of a surprise there, actually.
Yeah, I think it was a surprise he even made the team, honestly. A fourth-year player. Every year I write an article in camp about who are the guys on the bubble and try and handicap the percentage chance that they make the team. And the easiest way to do that, it's just the easiest article to write. Look down through all the fourth-year players, because those guys are all on the bubble when camp begins. And Hill would have been a guy I would have really expected not to make the team, but injuries at the position, and Dobbins and Edwards not returning after more than a year made it possible for him to make the team. And then he played well, always been a good special teams player. So you get that out of him. And he's been a missing stylistic component for the Ravens, who have brought in 5 different geriatric running backs over the last 2 years in Latavius Murray. I mean, the names are just hilarious when you listen to all these things, like bad talk show host guests or something. Latavius Murray, Devonta Freeman, Le'Veon Bell. That's a lot of New York influence here, by the way. And then this year, Kenyon Drake and Mike Davis. I mean, just all older guys. I think they got him because they thought they could work the mesh point with Lamar better. But what it really does is just is cut down on the speed threat to the outside, and really it's hurt the Ravens offense pretty terrifically to have those guys in there.
And then my other question was, have you been impressed by or pleased? Obviously pleased. Are you impressed by Duvernay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy. I think he's taken a big step forward this year. Always been kind of thought of as kind of a tight-hipped player, and a guy who didn't have a lot of wiggle at the top of the route. And Bateman has that in spades. He's really good at that. Demarcus Robinson has shown some of that in the preseason. So he's another guy who could show up at the X receiving spot. But Duvernay is a pure Z. He's a guy who you want on the outside, usually means on the right side of the formation with a tight end at the line of scrimmage on that side. I don't know how much football explaining I should do on the show, but a guy who you want to have the motion ability, because in jet motion, he threatens the other side of the field. You can also hand the ball off to him. He probably is a player who can benefit from a release from the line of scrimmage, so he doesn't have traditional route running being that. But he's been better as just a plain route runner this year, and has caught, I think, 15 of 17 balls now for the year. So it's been a very good year so far.
17 of 20, actually. So he's
17 of 20, very good.
Yeah, he's off to a very good start. I mean, it's funny because, in looking at the Ravens preseason, that was one player that I didn't expect to see that much production out of, at least to this point. So I know he surprised me. Steve, what else?
Necessity.
I'm sorry, Ken?
His necessity is the mother of production.
Right. And it's funny because your Justice Hill sounds like our Darius Slayton, same kind of thing. It was a player that we really didn't expect to make the roster. And here we are week 5, 6 now. And now all of a sudden he's an important piece. So a lot of similarities there.
Ken, so I love the fact that you're bringing up the other receivers, the Z receiver in the motion, because that's a perfect segue to my question, which is, as Giants fans, probably more than any other team in the NFL, and hopefully you've probably been aware of this just as a fan of another team, hearing about what's going on with the mess we've had, especially the last 3 years, but for so many, but the last 3 years with our offense, and our offense that was stuck in the Stone Ages, and how Giants fans have just been screaming for a modern offense, something. And what we got was, as you know, Dable and Kafka with a little bit of Kansas City, a little bit of Buffalo. I mean, to say that we're a more modern offense, even in spite of all the injuries and in spite of the short time that these players have had together, a brand new offensive line, et cetera, it's been not just breathtaking, it's been amazing to watch how quickly they've been able to, week after week, put more installs in and use pre-snap motion, post-snap, misdirection. So that, therefore, my question is, as a Giant fan, finally seeing this for our team and having in the past only seen it with the Kansas Cities, the Buffaloes, what can we expect to see with this version of the Baltimore offense? Because we know Lamar, MVP, can run. He's never out of it, has a cannon of an arm. We know Mark Andrews, the tight end, one of the best, most unheralded tight ends in all of football. We know Baltimore always has a big bully offensive line. I know they have a couple injuries, and I mean, we could talk about that. I'd like to talk about that. But with that Bateman being out especially, if I haven't watched any Ravens games this year, what's the scheme on offense and what can we expect?
Yes.
Okay, glad you brought it back to scheme, because it's a lot better to talk scheme with the Ravens than it is to talk individual players. One of the things that I always say is that Lamar makes all the players better. So you can operate the Roman scheme, and if you have Lamar, then he can do it with some lesser players. In fact, I think the 2019 offense, which ended up being, some of those players were better than I really thought they were. But it's still an above average offense that was a historically good offense in terms of points per drive. Yeah. What the Ravens do very well under Roman's scheme is to threaten horizontally the defense at 3 points. So they stress the defense to stretch out, and they have settled now, after a couple seasons of moving around on this, that Lamar is going to be a run up the middle guy as opposed to the run to the sideline guy.
Yes. So
the difference this would come in is if they ran out of pistol, they'd run Lamar would be an outside threat, and they'd run to the sideline, because the handoff would be on the side. He could fake it in the mesh point and then take it off and go right, usually, or left if the handoff is on the left. But what they've settled on is sidecar, where the running back is next to the quarterback and the handoff is in front. And that has a lot of advantages to it, because Lamar can continue to see the whole field, much better sense of what's in front of him that way. And they pair that up.
So to hit the pause button, if just not to be rude, but when you say sidecar, is that what we're starting to see more and more with NFL offenses, with essentially an RPO, a run pass option? Because you have the option, he's off to your left or to your right, depending upon if you're righty, lefty, and the play. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Yeah, it's sidecar it's just a position of the running back relative to the quarterback in shotgun. And yes, it's usually related to some point of mesh point play, whether it's RPO or just a read option or whatever it might be. You have that. He has the ability to he puts the ball in the mesh point, generally speaking, and he pulls it, and he would like the ability to pull it very late. So he wants to have as much time as he has to pull that football. And the more time he has for that to occur, and you don't want to slow down the running back in the process, but the more time he has for that to occur in terms of the running back being comfortable with the ball coming out late, the more chance he has to catch the key defender on the wrong foot. And that's the thing Lamar Jackson, it's not really recognized about Lamar. So I go on shows and I talk about it, but Lamar is not the fastest of the fast guys. He has decent speed. He's gained 18 pounds. He probably is a 4.5 guy now. He was never a 4.34 guy. That was a load of crap for some timing that happened in school. But what he is he reads leverage better than not only any football player I've ever seen, but better than any athlete, or at least in the top group of athletes. So when you're talking about reading the opponent, figuring out what the opponent is doing, Muhammad Ali is the proper analog. And a guy who could read a punch from a mile away, or Barry Sanders and Gale Sayers are probably the closest thing in NFL history in terms of guys who could those guys I think of more as being people who would like a good receiver at the top of the route, make somebody make the wrong move. Lamar he's reading the leverage, and he knows when that person's in the most disadvantageous position to then him stick his foot in the ground hard and go the other way. So
do you think, just to drill that down, if I may, and again, I'm interrupting, it's just so fascinating, I can't help it. So do you think from a defense, and I don't want to force us to get into Wink, et cetera, but since we're talking about, do you think the most successful defenses, it's not just confusing Lamar, which Wink is a master of, to quarterbacks, but do you think they're going to have a spy on him? If you had to guess, are you almost expecting Wink to have a spy some of, or at least the majority of the time? Because how can they possibly know what Lamar is going to do on any given play?
I mean, the spy is one way to combat what he does, and so take somebody out of your pass rush and out of your pass defense. So it's a reasonable allocation of resources. We've seen the Patriots did a fair amount of that in the game against them. The Bengals kind of did a hybrid of that was very effective, unfortunately, but they basically left a linebacker opposite, and he came on a delayed blitz, so they wouldn't do these immediate red dog type blitzes, and he also wasn't waiting to see if he had some coverage responsibility coming out of the backfield. He just like waited a half second to blitz, and that was very effective at getting to Lamar outside the pocket and forcing pressure. And this was the first game Lamar's really had a lot of trouble with pressure in this last week. It's a little bit of trouble against Buffalo as well, but a ton against Cincinnati.
Hopefully not the last game.
Yeah. Hopefully it starts a trend.
Wink will see that.
Let's go into the offensive line quickly. What are your thoughts about the offensive line? Where are the weaknesses? How can we expose them? And what do they do well that we should look for?
Right. Well, I mean, depending on obviously on who's active, whether Leonard Williams is back, he's a huge threat, and Dexter Lawrence is as well.
Right.
A gap and on the left side, they have significant size issues. Tyler Linderbaum is a guy who is quick, and he does a lot of things well, processes quickly, but he's not a big guy, and very short-armed and very small for a center in the NFL. Definitely someone who's tended to get off balance a fair amount in his first few games, but it's gotten better as the season has gone along. There's some stats out there about, no sacks allowed. So what? Centers almost never allow sacks, particularly a full PFF sack as they're looking at it. So in terms of what he's done, he's had some penalties, but he's given up some pressure. But I think generally he's shown a generally improving trend line and been pretty good. Ben Powers has been excellent at left guard, which was really unexpected. But if you want a guy who has a little bit of trouble with processing, that would be the guy. So that left A gap, I think, is at risk with Wink. Wink he knows these guys well, and not Linderbaum, but he knows Powers well, certainly, and will find ways, I think, to take advantage of that with the massive bodies that the Giants present.
And how concerned are you about Wink knowing this team so well and to scheme effectively here and to come up with something that's going to really cause you a lot of trouble?
Yeah, I mean, I would expect that. Wink's very adaptable as a defensive coordinator. I loved him. I was really sad to see him go. I wish they had tried to extend him. I think he wanted an extension. I think he wanted to stay in Baltimore, but the Ravens weren't willing to go beyond this year. They wanted to kind of let the contract play out and see where they were. And so they just agreed that they would mutually part ways. And I assume he did not get paid for his final year with the Ravens. And he went on to get the Giants game. So he had some comments apparently today that were very conciliatory about getting re-energized and being family with Harbaugh and whatnot that I was happy to hear, because he's certainly the Ravens, one of their top 3 coordinators they've ever had on the defensive side. And that's saying an incredible amount given the string of greatness the Ravens have had on that side of the ball, but up there with Marvin Lewis and Rex Ryan in terms of guys who really had a very special impact on the Ravens defense.
Steve?
So I love that we're talking about defensive line. We're hopefully, I don't want to jinx it, but it seems like we're getting Leo back.
Yes.
The big cat. I mean, it's for my money, he was the 3rd best defensive tackle in football last year behind Aaron Donald, and then the kid who went from San Francisco to Indianapolis. I keep forgetting his name. He's
Buckner.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm flaking out on that, but he's a game changer because he can push the pocket, play the gaps, the double team. I mean, there's so much that he can do. And he gives us options on that interior of the offensive line. Talk to me about Ben Powers, because Ben Cleveland, you want to talk about a big man.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my God, he's a humongous human being and he's not playing. He's your starter. So I heard you say you're surprised. So how much of a drop-off has there been with Ben Powers? And is that something that got Giants with our 2 starters on the interior, the strength of our defense, if you will? Do you think they might be able to take advantage of that?
I mean, I do think it's possible to take advantage of it. Powers actually won the starting job directly out of camp. Cleveland,
Oh, he
it's funny,
did.
it's funny, yeah, funny story here. He's hurt right now. He's got a foot injury, and I'm disappointed that he wasn't the presumptive starter coming into the season because he played well enough at the end of last year that I think he'd earned the right to fail based on the fact he's a year 2 player and Powers is a year 4 player.
Mhm.
So I'm really big on get your younger players on the field so you can find out what you have early enough. Powers earned an escalator, and there was even talk that he might be cut, which thank God they didn't do that because they've really needed him and he's been good this year. But Cleveland, the thing is, he got married right before training camp and he showed up at camp. And there's something the Ravens did that tells me they're very unhappy. First of all, failed his conditioning test, missed the first 4 practices. That's a huge no-no for Harbaugh to do that. It's a difficult test, but it just measures basically aerobic exercise. It's basic sprints for 10, 20, 30
He's a
yards.
huge man. He's like 370 pounds or
Yeah.
something.
Well, that's what they've got him listed at night right now. Now, here's the funny thing. He came out at 356, I think, at the combine, and they wanted to show probably a large weight. Then he was listed last year at 335. So he showed up, and I think they weighed him in, and they wanted to put his full weight on there because they're saying, we want everybody to know why, you're not playing here, kind of thing. And then he played very well in the preseason. Played both right guard and left guard. I thought, maybe they'll forgive him. Maybe they'll get back into rotational play at some point. Harbaugh is known for kind of having a kennel, not just a doghouse. So you get on the wrong side. Salty comments can be made. Most of the time, he's very effusive, but there's different ways to be effusive. You can go out and do what he does for a Chuck Clark, and you say he's bold, brilliant, and brief kind of thing. And he's gone to the trouble to come up with these extra adjectives. Or he's saying he's a big part of our offense. He's a very good player. Well, that he's going to say about everybody. So he's when you get Ben Cleveland and he starts not really talking in glowing terms about him, then you might have a problem. There've been some other guys who've really had work ethic issues that he'll even get saltier with.
Wow.
What do you think is the strength of that line? We're as Giants fans very familiar with Kevin Zeitler. Majority of Giants fans didn't want him gone. He was our best offensive lineman when he was here. And then Morgan Moses, I mean, the guy came from Washington, so we all know him as, somebody that we saw twice a year. Is that right side of the line if they're going to run it? What's the strength of that line?
Well, it's interesting. They've had to change, but Zeitler is probably the strongest offensive lineman right now at right guard. I would still say Ronnie Stanley, if he plays all the snaps, he was excellent in 22 snaps in his first game back, or good, I would say anyway. I'm just so thrilled at the difference in level of play between Stanley and all the other guys who are not Stanley who played there this year. There's been 3 other guys who played left tackle. So it was a big jump up, and that. He's frankly is the big domino. If he can play most of the rest of the season for the Ravens are going to win the division. They will be a serious Super Bowl contender, and there won't be much to talk about. If he has to miss time again at some point, or if he never can really get back from this, or if those 22 snaps are an aberration, which is also possible, then there's trouble. So I think the Ravens are a little bit concerned about the field conditions at the Meadowlands based on what happened to them in week 1 against the Jets. And I think a general word that's going around the league, but they do have a concern about it. And they may keep Stanley on a fairly limited pitch count this week, but I would expect him to go up from a third of the snaps to maybe half to 2/3 of the snaps this week.
Wow. That's actually a good point about the turf that's out there. It seems more and more that it's not just a giant secret anymore, that I don't know if you can necessarily plan for that, but it's definitely the word is out there amongst teams that, it's not the best surface and you gotta be careful.
Yeah.
And like you said, that's gonna actually affect who plays and how much. So I don't know if the Giants can use that to their advantage, but it changes things a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not something. I mean, the Ravens have had so many problems with injuries. They're the most injured team in the entire NFL right now, and to go into a place that's known as a little bit higher injury risk, even playing on turf at all, I don't like. But then the extra risk of having to play on a turf stadium that has a lot of slipping issues and some additional perceived risk, we'll call it. Really don't like that.
Right. Let's talk about Mark Andrews a little bit quickly here. Look, we all know how good he is. I think Steve nailed it. He's probably one of the most unheralded tight ends in the league. He's a great player. Where do you see him most effective? Is it, the seam pass? Because we previously to this year had so much trouble with tight ends. And, is it the seam? Is he more of a downfield, threat? Tell us where you see him most effective and what we need to look for.
Yeah, there's two ways in which Mark Andrews is exceptionally valuable. One is on just basic play action plays, good release, and he'll because Lamar freezes linebackers so effectively, he's made Andrews that much more effective at being available between level 2 and 3. Crosses very well under those circumstances. So that's one significant place where he's found. And then the other things is Lamar, he gets lost a lot in coverage, even though you would never think that would happen with a player like Andrews. But Lamar extends plays so well, and they have this hive mind thing going on that they always know where Andrews is going. Lamar always knows where Andrews is going. Andrews always knows where Lamar wants to throw the ball. He is basically allowed to find space wherever on the field is appropriate. And they have a lot of extended plays that are a fair percentage of his total yardage involved, and a lot of his efficiency. And Andrews is also suffering this year, and did last year as well, from being Lamar's bailout guy. So if he's the guy you always go to when everything is breaking down, and you always are willing to throw it into a one-on-one coverage to Mark Andrews, well, it creates interceptions, creates a lot of contested catch situations that are not going to be as good for him, and ends up dragging down his overall stats and whatnot. Through 9 interceptions thrown to Mark Andrews last year. So that was incredible.
And how's his blocking?
He's okay as a blocker. He's the main inline blocker, and that's been a big, we didn't expect this. We expect Nick Boyle to come back and be the main inline tight end blocker. And he and Ricard really gave the Ravens 7 heavies in their glory years of 19 and 20 in terms of running the football, and getting back to that would really be something special. But Nick Boyle can't even get on the field right now because Josh Oliver has taken his role as a blocking back. So the fact that he's doing pretty well, I think is a good thing.
Steve?
So if I could, I'd love to just switch it back to defense for a moment. It's funny when I look at your team statistically, there's and I think about our defense. You guys, the one thing that stuck out at me that I was surprised in is passing yards given up. I'm sure you're not as surprised that I'm bringing this up. Is statistically number 32 in the league at this point in the season in passing yards given up. We're number 8. That's a shock because our secondary, we don't have a true number 2. Robinson, even our number 2, who's a young guy, and he's finally getting some playing. He got hurt again. Dory had to come out of the game. And we had these guys literally like off the street. I think at least one of them came off your practice squad. It was a retread. So how Wink's doing it, it's Wink. We all know Wink. I mean, he's smoke and mirrors in some ways. When I think of your team, I think of putting pressure on the quarterback. Historically, when it was with Wink, it was exotic at times. It was coming at fast linebackers. You talked about your inside linebackers. You have no Ty Spauser off the edge. No, Ojabo is just coming back off that injury. Odafe Owe finally has a sack, but it's only his one sack. So the leader of your sack is kind of a retread too, Justin Houston with 2 sacks. So the Giants are, I guess where I'm going with this is the Giants are doing it sack by committee. It's coming from all over the place. I don't know that there's one person on the Giants that scares another team. Maybe Dexter Lawrence. He's playing almost at a, not just Pro Bowl, but an all-pro level there at the nose. Do you have a player that we as Giants fans, when we think of our offense, should be scared about? And I should say also, obviously, the Ravens fans know this all too well. Marcus Williams is not playing. He's a very important piece in your secondary. So is there someone on your defense that when we think of our offense, like, well, that you would think our offense is keying in on, or who should we pay attention to as fans?
Well, the Ravens, both corners are outstanding. Both outside corners are outstanding, Humphrey and Peters, and they've made a ton of plays so far this year. So they'd be guys that I think you would probably want to be careful about throwing into coverage. In particular, the Ravens need to get a little bit of pass rush going to improve who Marcus Peters is. Marcus Peters is one of the greatest gamblers in the history of the National Football League. He undercuts routes, but he does it by understanding what the pass rush is doing on that play as well. beta quarterback as needed, and do a lot of that, do all kinds of things to get turnovers. And he's really been doing well there this year. He had a great fumble recovery on the sideline. He had a forced fumble that Patrick Queen somehow didn't pick up. And he had another interception that was, a typical kind of a Marcus Peters play. But the Marcus Williams had also been outstanding. Losing his 3 interceptions is a really big deal. I don't know how long he's going to be out, but one of the guys I really like is Geno Stone to play on the back end in his place. Ravens really had 4 good safeties. I wanted them to keep all 5. I really wanted to find a way that Tony Jefferson could make the team, because he could be replacing a linebacker on passing downs, and particularly could be replacing the Mike linebacker who normally stays on the field on passing downs in this defense. I would have really loved for that to be the case. And now they're a safety short. They still got 3 good ones, but it means Hamilton has got to go in there and play on third down, probably as a weak side linebacker effectively.
So just to follow that up then,
Yeah.
if the Ravens are 32 in the NFL in passing yards given up, with those 2 corners and Williams before he got hurt at safety, how is it that teams are doing it? Is it because they're taking advantage of short and intermediate routes and yards after the catch? Like how are the teams you've played so far this year doing that?
Right.
Okay, so there's multitude of factors here.
Yes.
So number one is there've been some coverage breakdowns on the back end that have largely involved the rookie Hamilton, in particular in the Miami game.
Oh,
Second,
the Notre Dame kid, Carl. We love
yeah,
that.
Yeah.
we loved him too.
Yeah. You guys had an amazing draft. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a fortunate that he was still available. At least it seemed so at the time. And in the Miami game where the Ravens had a 21-point lead, he gave up the 60-yard touchdown to Hill by not being in the correct position. In fact, he came up to the line of scrimmage next to Marcus Williams, and Marcus Williams, realized he was in the wrong place and immediately bailed out to the spot he was supposed to be at. But of course, much too late for it to catch Hill on that 60-yard touchdown. So other reasons why it's happened. The Ravens pass rush has been decimated by injuries on the edge.
Yeah.
So Justin Houston won't play this week. Jason Pierre-Paul came in and had a good game last week. A so-so game in his first game back. I didn't think he was particularly great, but 2 passes defensed, actually on consecutive plays this last week, as well as a sack.
Ken, did I hear you correctly? I'm sorry, Justin Houston's not playing this weekend?
No, he's not playing this weekend.
Oh, wow.
That caught my attention too. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know they've ruled him out officially yet, but he's been DNP the first 2 days of practice here. And I think they're expecting a longer period. They didn't put him on IR, which would tell you he could be back at any week.
Right.
I think that's more a case of they need to try and hope he'll be back because they're so weak at edge. They've got Adafe Owe and JPP are basically playing almost every snap. They've got Brandon Copeland, who's a retread from the Falcons, kid who came from Baltimore originally, who they've signed to the squad, and they've got an inside linebacker, Malik Harrison, who hasn't been bad, but him playing on the edge is a little out of position for him, and he's certainly not a great pass rusher. So very limited edge ability. They've really had to rely more on Calais Campbell as an edge on some plays. So anyway, that Ravens pass rush has really not been particularly good at getting pressure. They've got a not terrible sack total, but they really haven't been that good at getting pressure.
And does that defensive coordinator who took over after Wink, does he believe in blitzing? Is that something you see or expect?
Much less than with Wink. Wink, much more varied pass rush, and multiple elements with Wink. He had a lot of variation by number, and so you see a lot of cover 0, but you'd also see him occasionally rush 3. But he also had a large amount of use of deception. So
Yes.
they dipped heavily into simulated pressures, stunts, and twists, and blitzes from off ball. And I always say there's 4-man rushes and there's 4-man rushes. You can rush 4, and if it's the 4 straight at the front, you're not really showing anything deceptive to the opponent. They can at least try and block it up. They may not be good enough to do it, but they can at least try. You could drop 2 on the outside, and you can bring 2 inside linebackers. You can bring somebody from safety or slot corner. That's more like what Wink did in Baltimore anyway. I don't know how has he shown a lot of that with the Giants so far this year?
Good. Good, Steve.
Yeah. So, to me, a lot of what he does is, as you said, he'll do pre-snap deception where he'll literally show like 8 men in the box, not just in the box, like literally lined up across
on the line of scrimmage.
Right.
Don't know who's going to rush. But what you could tell what they're doing is they're waiting and figuring out which of the gaps are going to be unblocked. And then they shoot that gap like a bat out of hell.
Yeah.
And we've seen that work. And it's often our defensive backs, our safeties, and our corners. Julian Love is finally being used like that. Xavier McKinney, guys who in the past would never have been blitzed. Patrick Graham did these exotic zone coverages. It's, modern defense today, all the zones, bend, don't break, no pressure on the quarterback. It's, better than us. I mean, Wink's just the opposite of that. So it's been pretty cool to watch.
And as you could see also, to Steve's point about, we've got our safeties almost up in the box now, which I'm sure you're familiar with, being down there and all those years in the Wink. You could actually see the level of comfort and the confidence in these guys making more plays and moving around. It's been great to see the development of this defense and this system as the season gone on. It's just been great to see. But one thing I wanted to tell you, touched on a player that I wanted to drill down on. I love him, which is Patrick Queen. Loved him as a rookie. I thought it was a great draft pick. Dropped off a little bit last year. There seems to be a little unhappiness, maybe. You can describe it better. I know he's not the biggest inside linebacker. I love his athleticism, but what's the story with him? And Josh Burns also. And I thought Burns is pretty good also, but what's going on there?
So Josh Bynes, a guy they've brought back twice to the Ravens. He was at an original. He was with the Super Bowl team in 2012, earned his ring, went away to Arizona for a number of years, came back in 2019, fixed the defense immediately when he showed up with LJ Fort. They had huge problems at linebacker. They effectively flushed the toilet on who they had there and brought in these two guys off the street. They turned the whole defense around. The defense was fantastic the rest of the year. Then they, for whatever reason, they let Bynes go to Cincinnati. And in 2020, they drafted Patrick Queen. He really did not have a good rookie year, and there's multiple problems. He's a terrible coverage linebacker. He has the speed to do it. His judgment is terrible. His diagnosis was really bad. It was worse then. It's better now. But all of the elements you want in coverage were bad on downhill plays. And when the play was behind him, it's like the receivers are invisible. They don't even exist anymore. He doesn't know where to go on the field spot wise, does not read the quarterback well. And that, if those were his biggest problems, you could maybe still make him a 2-down linebacker. But the problem, the truth of the matter was, he's been a really bad tackler. He does not wrap up. He's a very high missed tackle rate since he joined the league. I've been a particular criticizer of his in his 3 seasons so far. He will not. I don't think the Ravens are going to exercise the 5th-year option, for example, on him. They'll have to at the end of this year, and I think they'll let him go. Which means he'll play 4 years as a Raven, and then he'll move on to somewhere else in all likelihood. But there's just too many things wrong in terms of his understanding of what he needs to do on a football field to build a good player out of this. Despite outstanding athleticism, he's been a real presence as a blitzer.
Yeah,
he's done some things as a pass rusher that have been positive. He just doesn't wrap up to tackle. He doesn't shed blocks at all. Has had the missed tackle problem showing up. Not being able to cover downhill on screen passes has really hurt in a few games, particularly against the Colts last year is one I would point to. He had in his going back to his rookie year in 2020, they played the Kansas City Chiefs and got beat in 3rd or 4th week of the season, and he had 5 separate occurrences where he got talked to by another player on the field who made an emotional move at him after the play. Now, you play football, defenses are accountable to each other. They're saying, okay, you're supposed to be here. You're not supposed. So when a player is talking to something out, they're usually pissed off about something that the other player did. And sometimes you get a player, LJ Fort, very classy, low 5, talks to the guy. It's not even obvious. They're done. We're back to the next play kind of thing. Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters will let you know in no uncertain terms when you've done the wrong thing. And so Marcus Peters will go up to him, literally going to cock his head at him and go, "Did you think that was the right place to be?" kind of thing. And these the fact that other defenders are getting upset with him on the field
That's not good.
is something that
It's a problem.
is not good.
Yeah, that's a problem. Steve, what else do you have?
That's all that I have for this game. I mean, this was incredible, Ken. I feel like the only probably thing we probably didn't go into is special teams. So I don't know if there's maybe anything. Obviously, you guys have one of the all-time great kickers.
Yep.
I mean, what more can you say?
Right.
We're as ecstatic as Giants fans are with Graham Gano, who, for lack of a better word, is Mr. Automatic for us, set the record recently last year, in consecutive kicks. I mean, you guys have like an all-time great. So I don't know if there's anything we should know about your coverage or anything else, but I feel like we talked about almost everything.
Ken, I have a
Fair
quick
enough.
question. I'm sorry. I have a quick question. Something goes wrong. You don't make the playoffs this year. Does Harbaugh still come back?
I think for that to happen, events will have to unfold that we have not foreseen yet. So if it's another year of just ridiculous number of injuries, I think he's probably safe. If it's a case of the team is there, but there's a whole lot of bad decision making and judgment, then I think there's a risk. I mean, he's one of the greatest coaches in the league, and he's been around forever. I don't think that there's a real risk of him losing his job. I don't think he should. I think it'd be a really bad move if the Ravens let him go. There's always a component on Twitter, whether no matter who you're fans of, but certainly if you're Ravens fans, that they either hate the offensive coordinator right now, who's having a great year, by the way, or they hate the defensive coordinator. And ours is in the honeymoon period, but Wink got all kinds of vitriol that was completely undeserved in terms of his last couple of years in Baltimore. And there's always a very consistent and vocal Fire Harbaugh group that frankly is still a minority, but I find very tiresome, frankly.
And take us through the play against Buffalo very quickly. That there was a very controversial play towards the end of that game. Take us through that.
Okay, the fourth and 2 conversion attempt.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a math guy, and I'll just say for starters here, it's a something that you can do it on math with if people would take the time to try and understand it, they'd realize that the math behind it is not that complex. But it's something I think that whenever I talk to people about it, and I've had discussions with this about people on my show, is they always feel, and fans I'm talking about right now, always feel like you're talking down to them if they either don't want to invest the time in understanding the math or can't really understand the math. But this is basic decision tree math. You're looking effectively what you have to do to determine if this is the right play is to look at what was the probability of them winning if they made the field goal, which was about 63%, and then what is the probability of winning if they failed to make it times the probability of them failing to make it, plus what's the probability of them winning the game if they make it times the probability of them making it, and you're trying to solve for them for the probability of them making it in that equation. It's very simple math actually to do it. To me, it's an automatic. As an actuary, I'm an expected value guy. These kind of things come up all the time. We always look at it. I understand if some other people feel like it's too difficult or it's too long ago in terms of when they learned it. But what I would say is models are here to stay. Mm-hmm. We're going to make those decisions by mathematical models for the rest of time, I think, in football. And it's going to get more prevalent, not less. We've seen that trend certainly in recent years. So what I'd say is question the assumptions, question how the model is put together. Would this be correct given the amount of rain that was on the field that day, or would this be, whatever the case may be, come up with your reasons why you think the model might not be right. But it's not going to be done. We're not going to go back to seat of the pants things. And the coaches, frankly, of the 60s and 70s and 80s were leaving so many points on the field, it's not even funny. Right. In terms of their bad judgments. So,
right. Yeah. So did you agree with the call?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. They had to have a 41% chance to succeed on that. And some people would look at it and say, well, their success rate on 2-point conversions has only been 25% or something. And there is some period over which that's true. But I still think it was the right call. I think if you look at, a larger sample size of 4th and 2 plays from the 2-yard line, I think you'd find that Lamar had been successful on many more than that.
really quickly before we go, who do you give us a player on each side that you have your eyes on this week?
Okay, well, I already mentioned Geno Stone. He'd be my guy on defense, who I think, it seems to be a hole with Marcus Williams out, but I think he's got a chance to succeed. Devin Duvernay had such a big game on offense. I'm looking forward to see what he might do in terms of creating stress on the Giants defense. And the thing that the Ravens will want to do is stretch that line of scrimmage horizontally as much as possible, get players on the Giants moving out of position, whether this be linebackers or safeties, whatever, overreacting to what the Ravens seem to be doing, and then that can free up Lamar for some very big runs up the middle.
And what Giant players are you most concerned about? One on offense, one on defense.
I'll give you two on defense. It's definitely Lawrence and Williams on the interior of the line. In terms of an offensive player, who am I most fearful of? Saquon got to be there. There's nobody else really.
Yeah, I agree. Steve, do you have anything else?
No, just the overall comment. Much love and respect for the Ravens organization. I feel like ever since they've come into the league, but obviously Ozzie Newsome had so much to do with it. But when I was a kid, super quick story. I said this in our very first episode ever. I was a Pittsburgh Steelers fan in the 70s. I didn't know much about football. I just had the little pennant in my bedroom, where I lived with my parents in our apartment. And all I knew was, Super Bowl, and then fast forward to early 80s, growing up in that area in New York City, I became a Giants fan. Phil Simms, Lawrence Taylor, Bill Parcells. And funny enough, the two families, obviously, Giants fans know this and Steelers fans, a lot of other people don't know, have the Rooney Mara families have intermarried, and there's some famous actresses. And it's not just a coincidence, but the one thing the reason I talk about the Steelers, and I know it's the hated Steelers for Ravens fans, is to me, they were always the one organization that understood how to find, develop players, and in spite of how fans fall in love with them, but knew when to cut the cord if they wanted a certain amount of money. It was never a coincidence. They would always seem to go somewhere else and have maybe one or two. I think Kevin Green might have been one of the few exceptions.
Yeah.
Really didn't have, there was a clear fall off. I feel like the Ravens are that other organization in the last 10 to 15 years in particular that they're right there with the Steelers. Like, they know how to find them. They know how to let the draft come to them. They know how to win. They know how to find the right players, football players. They know how to develop them. And then they know Zadarius Smith, Matt Judon, none of these guys were first round picks. These were third, fourth, fifth. So much respect for the Ravens. And it's not just because my best friend is a Baltimore lifer. So yeah, just much respect and really appreciate you coming on with us.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. One point I just make about the last comment you make is great drafting teams have to make heartbreaking decisions about what players they keep, because you can't pay for everybody. You just can't afford it. The salary cap is king. And so they have to make good judgments. But it's a much better place to be that you're actually getting to choose between 2 or 3 players where you may only get to keep one, as opposed to having one guy who's 80% of the player you want that you feel like you have to sign to make your fans happy.
Right. That's a great point. Great point. Ken, very quickly, your website, your podcast, if you want to just promote it right away, go right ahead.
Sure. Filmstudybaltimore.com is the website. The podcast is Film Study with Ken McKusick, but you can find it on all podcast apps. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Film Study Ravens.
Ken, thank you so much tonight. This was really great. Loved talking to you. Your insight is phenomenal, and we really, really appreciate this. I know I learned a lot tonight. So, as always, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you. Great job. Go Giants. That's all I'm gonna say. And thanks again.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much.